You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Hope you guys are enjoying the brand new Hazard Ground website, hazardground.com. Lots of great features on it. Every single one of our previous episodes is linked on the website, so whatever you've missed over the past 100 plus episodes, you can get right there on the website. Also, maybe the most important thing about the website, our partnership with Amazon. Scroll down to the bottom of that homepage. You'll see a button there for Amazon. Click on that button, do your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage of whatever you spend, and we donate that right back to some of the great charities you've heard featured right here on the Hazard Ground. There's also a contact us page. Give us some feedback. Let us know what you like, what you don't like. As well, keep the guest suggestions coming. We've had a few guests recently that have been through listener suggestions. We certainly appreciate and love hearing from you guys on everything, as well as ideas of what stories you think would be great to have told here on the Hazard Ground. Reminder to follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, at Hazard Ground Podcast, and you will keep up with what's going on in the show. Plus, we put out a lot of information and more details about each of the guests that we have on each week, plus whatever we have coming up in the future. Now that all that's out of the way, let's get to this week's episode. Joining us this week is a 31-year veteran of the United States Army and a retired Sergeant Major who has held commands at every major level across the Army, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star level. He has deployed several times to Afghanistan and multiple times to Iraq, holding several different positions. He's one of the most highly decorated people we've had on the Hazard Ground podcast, and he has spent most of his career in the historic 75th Ranger Regiment. He is retired Sergeant Major Chris Greca joining us on the Hazard Ground podcast. Sergeant Major, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks, Mark. I appreciate that very, very kind introduction. And as we go through this, I'm sure most of your listeners are going to say it's overrated. So, but I look forward to this discussion, and maybe we'll learn something from one another.
Well, hopefully we will. But 31 years of a military career is nothing to shake a stick at, to say the least. And now you spend most of your time, trying to promote veterans' health and, awareness of PTSD and things of that nature. Is a really, really important topic that we discuss a lot here on the podcast. So we'll get to that. But go all the way back to the beginning, Chris. Tell me how you got your start and why you signed up for the military. Well,
I know we talked a little bit, Mark, prior to hitting the push to talk button or record button, but I grew up in a military family. And I honestly, with that being said, had no intention on joining the Army. I had a multitude of things going poorly for me. I was failing out of college in the Washington, D.C. area. I had a girlfriend at the time. We thought maybe she was pregnant. And so anyway, this is no kidding. I was at a red light. I looked to the right and I saw an Army recruiter, and I was heading to work at Lens Crafters. I was a frame stylist. I was, that guy who wore a blue blazer with a little name tag selling glasses at Lens Crafters, and I hooked a right. And without much thought, I walked in and I said, "Hey, I want to be an MP. You really don't need to sell me. I'm the easiest sell you've ever had." And the recruiter looked at me and said, "Absolutely. When do you want to do this?" And that evening, I went to Baltimore, Maryland. I took my ASVAB. The next morning, come to find out, I'm 1 inch too short at the time to be an MP. So 1985, 86, you had to be 5'9". And I measured in at 5'8.5". They rounded it down only for height. And they said, "You're too short to be an MP." And then after a little bit of discussion, I chose the infantry because of the $5,000 bonus. I told you I was failing out of college. I had shook in my dad's hand when I enrolled into college. And he said, "Listen, son, I don't pay for failure. So if any point, if you fail out or drop out, you're going to reimburse me the money. If you pass and graduate, the bill's on, I'll pick up the tab." So when I failed out, Mark, and got that enlistment bonus, I used that to pay off my father.
Pretty impressive. Did you tell your parents about the decision ahead of time? I mean, what did they say after you had done all this stuff?
No, my mother, that's funny that you bring that up, and I'm glad you did. I went to Baltimore, like I said. I took the SVAB, but I told my father, I actually lived in a basement apartment that he had. And I called him up and I said, hey, I'm not coming home tonight. I'm going to be with Jennifer, when in fact I was in Baltimore. So I enlisted, chose the infantry. My father was a prior enlisted signal man who became a signal officer. So he went to OCS about halfway through his career. He was a E7, retired as a major, 22 years of service. But I'll never forget the first thing, he was getting up he was getting ready for work, and I walked in and I said, hey, Dad, I got something to tell you. I enlisted. And he looked at me and he said, please tell me you didn't join the infantry. I swear to God. And I looked at him and I said, it's funny you should say that, because I joined the infantry. And so, he looked at me. I think he said life is about choices about that time, something that I've, re-said numerous times, over my military career to young men and women. Hey, life's about choices. Choose wisely. And at the time, that's the remarks he made. I didn't know. You can think as a dependent or a child of a military member that something about the military. I didn't really know anything about the military. So, but I had some cool experiences. I've lived in Taiwan growing up, and my 8th and 9th grade year, I went to Seoul American High School in Korea. So, and this was in the early 80s. So being exposed to over there on the peninsula as a young dependent, it turned out to be my first duty assignment. So coming back, as a young private to Korea, certainly a much different experience, but it was unique.
So with that, how did you end up in the 75th Ranger Regiment? Because I assume you knew nothing about it at the time, considering you knew so little about the infantry in general.
Well, I did. I showed up to Korea and I had a great non-commissioned officer, and I've given him a lot of credit over the years on some Facebook posts. His name was Stanley Salas. He ended up retiring as a warrant officer in the Special Forces community. But Sergeant Salas at the time, we lived in Quonset huts. I think I had like 27 of my closest friends that lived with me in this Quonset hut, literally on bunk beds on top of each other. But one evening, I was in 11 Charlie, so I was a mortar guy. Sergeant Salas said, hey, I think you really need to do this Ranger Battalion thing. And listen, we were drinking soju behind our Quonset hut, and he brought out, this was in the days, obviously, prior to computers, but he brought out a 4187, and he said, Greca, sign this. And I signed it, and it was requesting assignment to the 75th Ranger Regiment. And Mark, I knew nothing about, I didn't know about the Ranger indoctrination program. I knew nothing other than, I thought I had to go to I knew I had to go to Air Force school. So, but I really didn't understand the obstacles or the path that I would need to take. But, if it wouldn't have been somebody like Sergeant Salas really looking out for me, it never would have happened. So I give him all the credit in the world.
Well, it's funny that you say he was looking out for you, putting you in something you had no idea what you were getting into. So I guess my question is, as you go through each major hurdle, it's airborne school, it's RIP, Ranger indoctrination program, and then Ranger school, and literally living the suck, so to speak. Did you ever look back and go, yeah, thanks for the help, pal?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, when I initially got over to Korea, so this is March time frame of 87. In March, it was freezing, man. And clearly I didn't remember that as a dependent, the cold part. And they put me on the back of a Humvee, and I went across Freedom Bridge heading up to Warrior Base, and that's the Korean DMZ mission that they have up there, and you would pull 90-day rotations. And my organization, Second of the 503rd, had just gotten up there. Brother, I had never been so cold in my life. And after that first, this was in the days of EB boots, which were those big rubber thingies.
Yeah.
A parka, which was nothing more than a piece of a fabric with a liner on the inside. So very much like the field jacket liner. But I froze, and I swore, Mark, that I would never. I clearly wasn't going to re-enlist. I would do the minimum time. I was on a 4-year enlistment, but I was going to get out because the suck was so bad. But 6 months later, I signed a 4187 or whatever request. And a lot of that is, you've got pride. So when somebody cares enough and thinks that you've got the potential, a leader, and says, hey, as an example, you need to go to Ranger school. Well, if you admire that leader, regardless of what you're thinking in the head, you could be thinking, fuck that, I really don't want to go to Ranger school. But, more than likely what you're going to say is, at the time, hooah, I'm ready to go. Send me, now, when in fact that might not necessarily be what you're thinking. And then over time, things like the Ranger Creed and the Army values, and when it starts talking about, energetically why show the world and all these things as part of the Ranger Creed, they become more than words and you start living it. So, it takes a little while for those things to be inculcated. I mean, it doesn't happen after, basic training in AIT or the officer basic course or whatever. It takes a little while for young men and women to really start truly living those things. So did I ever look back? Yeah, probably initially. But within, a couple of years, no, I was full steam ahead. I learned to control my mind at that point. So I was in pretty good shape.
So, I mean, listen, you've got such a long career, so it's hard to really, get to all the details of everything that you've went through. But I guess when you look back on the whole process of becoming a Ranger and getting that tab, and then being in the 75th Ranger Regiment, is there anything particular that stands out to you, whether it's something in Ranger school, something you learned along the way, any moment of levity or whatever it may be? Is there anything that, sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, but what I'd say is there's many things, but number one, it's bits and pieces of many leaders, their traits that I took away. Number one. Number two, I learned that here I was second to last in my high school class. I still got into college based off my ACT scores, but I learned to apply myself in the military, and that was a Ranger thing. That was when I went to a school, whether it be a, Pathfinder school, an infantry mortal leader, whatever, it was, hey, come back as the honor grad or don't come back at all. Well, honestly, Mark, I was the honor graduate most of those courses, or at least commandant's list. So I guess my point was I learned to apply myself, but that was an amount of pride that I wanted to be the best. So even going to the 75th Ranger Regiment and continuing to proceed along my career, there was never a time that I didn't want to be the best. I didn't want to be the sergeant major of the Army. Don't get me wrong. I was trying to be the best squad leader I could be, and the best platoon sergeant, and the best first sergeant. And I wasn't ambitious to the point where I was, I had these blinders on. No, that wasn't it. But I think as a result of trying to be the best, things naturally occur. They just do. And that's my advice to a lot of people is how did you go so far in the military? Well, just do your job and do it well. And I promise you, if you do it and you genuinely care about your soldiers or service members and you do have humility, I promise you, man, things will naturally happen. Because damn well, soldiers can see through the bullshit.
Right, absolutely,
So if you're putting on a facade, you're just that dude.
You'll be found out pretty quick. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So for, a guy like yourself, who's in the Guard and commissioned officer, trust me, man, your soldiers kind of, I often say they either want to be like you or they're laughing at you, one of the two. So, and I promise you, there's really no middle ground to that. So either they want to be like you or they're laughing at you, and please don't be in the latter category, because if you are, you're that type of leader that you turn your back and and you're fat and you're grossly out of shape or you're incompetent or whatever it is. And, soldiers, they're not dumb, man. So they'll look around. So, and I could use an example of that with the former chief of staff of the Army. I was the Combined Arms Center CSM, so I worked for General Dave Perkins, who became the TRADOC commander. And at the time, the sitting chief of staff of the Army came out to talk to all the majors, and he talks for about an hour, a little over, and I'm sitting in the audience. And Mark, I'll tell you, he talked about readiness, training, and modernization, the pegs, and how not to hollow out the Army. And I thought that conversation was just tremendous. So it gets finished, and I walk into a small group, so a bunch of majors sitting in their classroom, just to have a conversation about what these ladies and gentlemen thought. Their only takeaway is they thought the dude was fat. They couldn't see past. It became such an obstacle to the content or of the information that was flowing out. They didn't even really hear them. They're like, well, Sergeant Major, the guy can't pass PT test. The guy is clearly not in accordance with the Army height weight standards. I'm like, are you guys and gals kidding me? But then I think to myself a little bit, Mark, and again, I'm not trying, because I think General O's message was phenomenal. I listened to it and I was like, God, man, these are going to make these majors better understand where the Army is not only at, but where it's going to. That was about the, time we were going to downsize, and why were we going to downsize, and, what we could afford in terms of brigade combat teams and that functional, multifunctional brigades. But they didn't hear the message, the majority of them. It got lost in translation, man, because the external and what they visually could see became a distractor to learning. So anyhow, man, I just thought I'd throw that in there. There's a vignette that maybe somebody probably can relate in their own experiences, and that goes to speak why appearance is important.
Yeah, good advice. Let me ask you, so when do you actually finish all the Ranger School stuff and get your tab? What month, year kind of time frame are you talking about?
Yeah, I went the first time, Mark, and I say twice. I was 4-1 on patrols, and I ripped my meniscus. I had 1 day left in the Dugway, or not Dugway, but Florida, down in Eglin,
right.
And then I was going to traverse out to Dugway. So anyway, I went back a year later and got my tab in 1989.
Okay, and the only reason I ask is because obviously, Desert Storm, Desert Shield are upon us. Are you part of that?
No, we are not. 275 doesn't play. So the only people that play internal to the Ranger Regiment is 175 sends a company to support another secret squirrel organization, internal to the special operations community. So no, 275 doesn't play. Matter of fact, we go out to the Nevada test site, and we start testing the Ranger special operations vehicles for long range insertions, and could they be used across the desert? No kidding. That's when we figured out we didn't have spare tires, and maybe a spare would be a smart idea. So, hey, listen, Rangers ain't always the smartest fellas in the world. But so, no, I did not play in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And then shortly thereafter, 93 time frame,
right.
I volunteered to come back here to Fort Benning. Because like every generation, you think the Army was harder, 5 years ago when you came in,
sure.
or 6, 7, however many years ago, when in fact that, I will tell you that is a myth, and it has always been a myth. But so I became a drill sergeant in 1993 here at Fort Benning. Did about 20 months as a drill sergeant, and then did the last 16 months as a drill sergeant instructor at the Fort Benning Drill Sergeant School. So once upon a time, they had a school here prior to closing it down and consolidating at Fort Jackson. So I was an instructor teaching other non-commissioned officers how to be a drill sergeant. And then from there, I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina by choice. I had reclassed from being an 11 Charlie, a mortarman, to a straight-up infantryman, an 11 Bravo. I did that for the money. There was a $20,000 re-enlistment bonus if I would say yes to being an 11 Bravo, and zero for being an 11 Charlie. So, frankly, it wasn't a hard decision, at the time. So I reclassified. But in doing that, I although I had been a weapons platoon sergeant in 275, prior to being, and I had worked the hurdles from a weapons platoon, and that's your fist, your mortar section, your snipers, I didn't feel comfortable enough to go in there and become a rifle platoon sergeant internal to the Ranger Regiment. So in other words, I wanted to go to a conventional unit. And honestly, because I had been to Korea, I didn't think the big army was that bad. So, unlike, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but, I always kind of liked the challenges. I grew up as, did that year in Korea, and I thought, hey, man, the big army needs great leaders too. And I certainly have been exposed to some, being an instructor at drill sergeant school, those NCOs coming through that had come from the 82nd or the 101st or wherever. I knew I wanted to stay on airborne status, so I volunteered, to go up to Fort Bragg. And I spent a few years up there as a rifle platoon sergeant, working for a guy that was a lieutenant who then was obviously a captain, but I knew him from 275, and he's currently a general officer, J.P. McGee. He served time in 275, 175, then went back to 275 as an XOS3. And he was, as they stood up Cyber Command, he was one of the 1 stars, but I'm sure he'll be a division commander out there. I mean, just a tremendous guy. And to this day, I have a great relationship with the guy.
Chris, is interesting. You signed up in the mid-'80s, and obviously there is, Vietnam ends around 73, 74 when it's all said and done. So you got about 10, 12 years of relative peace. You missed Desert Storm, where there was a Ranger contingent. You missed Somalia and Black Hawk Down, where there was a Ranger contingent. Right. Did you start to think as you got this far in your career that, man, I may never get a chance to go play in the big leagues here?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Did it bother you?
Absolutely. I think really what probably bothered me more than anything was Panama, because I was right there and just didn't go. I mean, I literally was in school or recovering, and so I didn't go to Panama. So, certainly small contingents from 175 and then 375 for Somalia. Yeah, I started... but I thought it was a good. In other words, I wasn't. What's the word I'm looking for? I wasn't insecure in my own skin.
Right.
Meaning, I didn't think. I had any. In other words, there was enough people out there. It's even like today. I'm startled by the number of people without combat patches.
Well, it's getting smaller and smaller, Chris. I mean, it's over 50% of the force now, just due to turnover, doesn't have one. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And so at the time, even though, I'm an E7, I'm only one of 2 11 Bravo platoon sergeants in all of the 82nd Airborne Division in 1998 that makes the E8 list. So I'm still, tracking. And I say tracking, it still hasn't affected me professionally. And that's when I volunteered to go back over to Korea because I wanted a company. I ended up getting the most forward deployed company. It was a fluke. I thought I was going to 2ID, and it turns out the Joint Security, the United Nations Command Security Battalion in the Joint Security Area, Camp Barnabas, they have one U.S. company. It had about 330 people at the time. Well, I get selected to go be the first sergeant of that company. So to sit up at, it used to be Camp Liberty Bell. Now it's Camp East Boniface. I mean, my hooch was a Quonset hut in 99. It's the same place I was as a private that I eventually worked to from Warrior Base. So it was kind of neat to be there. And then, no kidding, I'm going to tell you how small the world is. my junior ROTC instructor from 1980-81, when I was in ninth grade, Sergeant Major Braswell, was still teaching at Seoul American High School.
Wow.
So I run into this dude, and I'm like, you will never know. I know you don't remember me, but you'll never know the impact that you had on me as a young man. I didn't realize it at the time, but, looking back and reflecting, so it was kind of a neat experience. And, up there was Colonel Nixon and he became the 375 commander, the 75th Ranger Regiment commander, and he was the battalion commander up there in the JSA. So I was surrounded by that quality of people. The commission officers and the guy I backfilled was one of my closest friends from 275, who went to 175 as the first sergeant, John Van Cleve, who became the Rick Broke kind of HHC 75th Ranger Regiment commandant up there. So I was, and that's the reason why I got off the airplane, and John Van Cleve had seen me on an inbound roster. It's, we hadn't been communicating, and he told Colonel Nixon and Sergeant Major Donnie Hunt, hey, you need to pick this guy up to be the next first sergeant. Because John was leaving, and while I was there, I got a phone call from the sitting regimental sergeant major who said, "Do you want to come back to the Ranger Regiment?" I thought, Mark, I was going to go to the 101st. I changed my home base. I didn't want to go back to the 82nd. I had enough of that place. I just, so I said, hey, I'll do the Fort Campbell thing. So my home base, I was supposed to go back to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, but I got a phone call, and Wally Rackow, the regimental sergeant major, said, hey, I want you to consider coming back. I've got room in 2 battalions, 2nd and 1st. So I called my wife up and said, hey, what do you think? My mother-in-law at the time was still residing in Tacoma. My wife's from Tacoma. My mother-in-law lived there. So my wife said, hey, let's go to Savannah. Nothing against my mother-in-law. We love her. But at the time, it was just like, hey, let's get away a little bit. And so that's the reason why I chose 175 and went to 175.
Gotcha. Okay, so where are you on 9/11?
I am on the back of an aircraft flying from England to Hungary, and the pilots come back and they said, hey, the World Trade Center, one of the pilots, obviously, not both of them, came back, woke us up. We were sleeping on the floor of a C-130, and the co-pilot came back and said, the World Trade Centers have been hit, the Pentagon's been hit, and there's 17 hijacked aircraft in and around U.S. airspace.
Whoa.
We're going to divert into Bosnia. Well, we thought, Mark, change of mission. We just thought it was a training inject. Instead of going after the people in Hungary, we were going to go after. I mean, we were all convinced. Everybody on that aircraft.
Yeah, that must have been tough being up in the air, not really having any sense of visuals of what really was going on.
Well, no, we all went back to sleep because again, man, we were utterly convinced that. I mean, that didn't happen. I mean, nobody's going to fly a couple airplanes into the World Trade Centers, right, and hit the Pentagon. You got to be kidding me. I mean, that's unheard of. So, nobody, we landed in Bosnia. Matter of fact, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but the only thing we were thinking of was tax-free money. So we would get tax-free money in Bosnia, but not in Hungary, right? So when they diverted our aircraft, there was a couple of us on the back of the airplane saying, hey, man, I wonder if they're going to do up some memo and we're going to get some tax-free money for a month for landing in Bosnia. So it took us a little while to figure out it was real. Obviously the training exercise got canceled. We collapsed back into England. And then it took a few days for U.S. airspace to get cleared for us to head back to Hunter Army Airfield and kind of regroup and figure out what the game plan was from there.
How do you come to the realization that what they told you on the plane was accurate? Give me the events.
They took us off the back of the aircraft. They threw us in the barracks, and in the barracks was this old radio with AM radio. And so my sergeant major, who was on the back of my aircraft, Sergeant Major Doug Greenway, turned it on and started flipping through the channels. you couldn't understand anything except, it'd be in that foreign language. And then you would hear blah, 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 World Trade Centers, blah, 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 Pentagon. So, hey, man, unless there was some radio people working our exercise, this really happened. So it was some point being on the ground, I'm not, whether it was an hour, 2 hours, 30 minutes, I don't really recall, but there was a point where we all realized that, hey, this thing really happened. And then we just sat around stunned. We didn't have access to TVs, as you guys were watching, over and over again on, CNN or whatever, the World Trade Center's getting hit by those aircraft. We didn't have that. So it wasn't probably until I got back to Hunter Army Airfield that I saw it on TV for the first time.
I mean, that's just crazy. Did you get a chance to call your family, call your wife or anything and hear the story?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. We just, whenever they opened up airspace, we eventually landed, certainly through the, family readiness group or whatever. The spouses were notified and family members said we were coming back early from the training exercise. So, and then we thought, because we were the number one in the queue, we thought, our reaction would be immediately to load bags and, we would head over. That isn't the way it panned out. Certainly the regimental commander, the regimental 3, they said, no, we need to continue to have this, this QRF, this Ranger Ready Force 1. So we'll send the number 2. That way this 1 stays just in case something worse happens.
Stateside, you mean?
Yeah. Well, anywhere, globally.
Right. Okay.
Globally. So, at the time, because we were RF1, we're like, you got to be kidding me. And again, now I'm thinking to myself in my head, because, I haven't been to combat up to this point, and I'm the ops sergeant major at the time of 175. So I am not a first sergeant yet. You go there and, like being a company commander, they put you E8s. They would make the ops sergeant major, the intel NCO, both E89 positions. So I sat as the ops sergeant major, and was that when 9/11 kicked off and did my initial deployment into Afghanistan, November 2001, through Takagar, Roberts Ridge, as the ops sergeant major in 175.
Now, that's a story that we've told many different times here on the Hazard Ground podcast, both from Nate Self to Eric Gephardt to a bunch of other people who have all been part of Takagar. What do you remember about that?
Well, I wasn't part of Takagar, and I'll tell you from a different perspective, because I had a mission as well the day after Takagar, and it was a coordinated mission, and mine was in Orange Park, Florida. So I had redeployed literally before or when Takagar went on. So I was over there. So all the E8s made the E9 list, and they sent me back to take a company. So we have 3 companies at Hunter Army Airfield. We only have a company plus deployed. So my commander says, hey, you're going to go back. Unfortunately, you're not going to take Bravo company. You're going to take headquarters company because you're the only dude with first sergeant time. So I redeployed. When I hit the ground, my XO, Dan Walrath, said, are your Class A's together? And I was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, this is kind of a silly question. No, I don't have my first sergeant rank, because I'm both this side. He goes, no, do you have your Class A's together? There's a chaplain coming in, and I was like, what? And he kind of informed me that we had lost Common, Krause, and Anderson while I was deployed. Now, the difference is I knew these guys. So when I got tagged with casualty notification for Bradley Krause, I knew him, and I had just been talking to him. So, I got this duty chaplain from 3rd ID, because obviously our chaplain is forward deployed. By the way, I know Nate Self real well. We used to sit on Bagram and play spades almost every night when he wasn't top Takagar. And so anyhow, I got, because we lost 3 Rangers, 2 of the families, Anderson and Krause, both are from Jacksonville, Florida, and one of the parents are divorced. So it was me, Rick Merritt, who became the 75th Ranger Regiment CSM, followed me as the 10th Mountain Division CSM. it was me, Rick Merritt, and John Van Cleve, the guy backfilled in the JSA. We went and did a time on target to hit all three houses at one time, because what we didn't need was the families
calling each other.
Started talking. Yeah, so it had to have been. So I knocked on the door, and I thought I was good to go, man. I mean, on behalf of the Secretary of the Army, I regret to inform you. And Brad's stepfather answered the door, and I said, "Does Miss Sheila McGeown live here?" And he's like, "Yes, but she's sleeping. Can you come back tomorrow?" And I said, "No, sir, I can't. I really got an important message. Can I please come in?" And he said, "Yeah." And he started getting really fidgety, Mark. And I walked into the living room, and he starts, doing the cushions on the couch. And on the TV is the Fox news footage from the ISR feed, which is showing the CH-47 getting hit.
Oh, man.
Robert's falling off and the whole thing. So I'm thinking in my mind, they've been watching this, and they've been watching their son die, and they don't really even know it. So above, right on the, it was a TV stand, was Brad's picture. Brad was just a good-looking young man. I mean, he kind of epitomized. So I'm looking at this, this picture of Brad. I'm thinking in my mind, okay, I got this. And Sheila came around. I could hear him waking her up in the bedroom. "Sheila, honey, you got to get up. There's somebody here to see you." And she's like, what? Whatever. She starts, "Hey, what?" And you really need to get up. When she rounded the corner and we made eye-to-eye contact, Mark, it literally, I'm going to tell you, 31 plus years of military service, I have never done anything worse in my life than notify a next of kin, a mother, that her son is never coming home. To say that it gives you kind of a sense of purpose from that point, forward for the next, 15 years or however many I served, and kind of, to the previous years, kind of put everything in perspective for the reason why you train as hard as you do in order to try to prevent those things from happening. Now, the enemy votes. And in this case, those Rangers did everything right. It just was the nature of the beast and the nature of the mission. And again, they're heroes. But I'll tell you, man, dude, by the way, I never said anything. To tell you how hard it hit me, when she looked at me, she said, "Don't you effing dare." She fell on the ground. Those words on behalf of the Secretary of the Army, I regret to inform you, Mark, I never said anything. So, I literally just sat there. If it wouldn't have been, I sat there and looked at her in tears. She's obviously emotional now, and, I've got tears streaking down my eyes because as I'm looking at the picture of, Brad, again, I'm, reflecting to a week ago when I was with him at Bagram Airfield, and, we weren't BFF, I'm not going to say that, but certainly he was a young man that I knew, and it put a perspective. And by the way, that event has affected me for the rest of not only my military career, but my life.
Chris, it's going to affect me. I wasn't even there. Just hearing it rips my damn heart out.
Yeah. Oh, it was horrible. I mean, it was, Mark, it's, man, here's what I'll say. If you are somebody, I've been very vocal about emotional numbness and the effects of multiple deployments and becoming emotionally numb. Well, when I was a division sergeant major, we had ramp ceremonies almost every night for young men and women we put on the back of, aircraft in a, flag draped casket. Well, I really didn't feel. Well, I would say that probably started about the time that I knocked on Brad Krause's door, because what I learned was, and I obviously didn't do this intentionally, is, to have a lot of emotion isn't a good quality to have as a serviceman. It's really not, because we're in a very hazardous profession, right? Like the hazard ground. It is hazardous ground to walk in the boots of a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine. Well, what you figure out is, or I figured out, and I did this unintentionally, was I stopped feeling. Hell, my dad died. I was very, very close with my father. When he passed away when I was deployed in 2011, I got home and he hadn't quite passed yet. And all I'm thinking is, you better die here pretty quick because I got to go back to Afghanistan, right? And I didn't shed a tear. Yet when my dog died when I was deployed the same year, I grieved. So for whatever reason, I learned with human beings that I used to say it all the time. It's the nature of the profession. The profession of arms is a brutally, it's a brutal profession. And by the way, in our profession, people get wounded and killed, right? So as a senior leader, I almost said I didn't, I learned not to feel. But the problem with that is when you get back to the stage, just can't turn the feeling switch back on and off. It doesn't work that way.
Was there a time during these ramp ceremonies where, your tears got less and I know you said you had tears when you told Brad Krause's mother, but did the next time you go through it, were you still crying and then it started weaning off, so to speak?
No. And I'll tell you, so I deploy a few times I do the Jessica Lynch mission with 175, right. And really the story of that is General Mazaraki, Marty Barreras, who was killed, unfortunately, over in Afghanistan, them retrieving the remains of Jessica Lynch's peers that were buried in shallow graves outside the hospital. But I think post Brad's event, because that's the only people, my next couple deployments with 175, we didn't lose anybody. But I learned post that somehow to turn it off. The next time I had deployed for a long period was the 15-monther in East Baghdad. And as we were losing people, I got blown up a few times. So we loaded a kid one night who was killed. They were really in a pickle. In myself and my personal security detachment went up, loaded a kid who had been shot in the neck, and helped this colonel out who was part of a training team over there. And as we loaded the kid on, he was an Hispanic kid. He succumbed to wounds and he passed away. Well, the next morning, my lead gun truck driver, a guy, Sergeant Fellner, came up to me. He said, "Hey, Sergeant Major, can I talk to you for a second?" I said, "Yeah, what's up, brother?" He goes, I can't get that kid's face out of my mind. He goes, "Are you having problems?" And I was like, "No, man, you got to suck it up, brother." I said, "Unfortunately, man, that's, the nature of what we do. So no, I'm not." Now, with that being said, if you need to take a day or two off and not travel with us, obviously, we had a little drill and enough people that I could still circulate without him. But, I didn't even realize at the time. And I'll tell you, Mark, I probably looked at people as being weak for a long time.
Right.
People that displayed a lot of emotion. With that being said, I remember a general officer when I was deployed, he berated, this was no shit, almost Patton-esque, a sergeant for showing emotion as he was, as we were doing a memorial ceremony for one of his buddies who had been killed. And, the CG, the commanding general, tells this person, he tells me, he says, "Hey, soldiers want to see strength, I'm telling you, not weakness." That kid, that sergeant up there crying like a sissy, and that's almost a quote. And I looked at this general officer and I said, "Sir, I absolutely disagree with you." I said, "This company and that NCO are as good as they come." And this general officer didn't know what to think. He looked at me and he goes, "Well, I disagree with you, Sergeant Major." And I'm like, "Well, whatever. Whatever, sir. I got you." But so I still had emotion for those that were displaying emotion a little bit, especially the younger guys.
Sure, yeah.
But like seniors, when I would see seniors go up there and, make this, grab dog tags and stay up there forever, I literally, in my mind, Mark, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, would think to myself, quit putting on a show, man. Just stop it. Just get up, do whatever you got to do, pay your respects and move on. You're, a very, very senior level NCO or a very, very senior level officer. You really can't be feeling all that much. due to these losses. But that goes to show you how screwed up I was. Because, Mark, I was wrong. I mean, in reflection, and I talk to this a lot, man, was I wrong. But, it took me being the CENTCOM Sergeant Major and kind of having an event where, physically and emotionally, I pretty much collapsed. And I say emotionally, I didn't know I was kind of collapsing. And it took the deputy psychologist of U.S. Special Operations Command, a guy, Paul Baccio, who was working there, who said, "Hey, man, you got some issues." And I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean I got issues? And, and then it was kind of talking through that. I came to the realization, man, it isn't normal not to grieve when your father dies. It isn't normal not to, feel when you lose soldiers, and oh, by the way, again, turning that switch off and on, I loved soldiers so much, almost to the point where, again, embarrassingly, maybe I, at the time, loved them more than my own kids. I don't know. I mean, that's funny. If you look at pictures, I've always got my arms around them. I love to. Nothing made my day than to make a soldier laugh, and just going out there and circulating. And, hey, man, you got kids at home? Yeah, I got a 2-year-old. Hey, here's one of my coins. Give it to your 2-year-old and tell him, him or her when they get older, thank your dad for his service. This is because you're part of the 1% and you're that special. So, my connection with men and women in uniform was always there. So it wasn't like I was being a dick. I just had issues of my own, man. I mean, I still to this day with my mother and my, direct family, whatever, I've become somewhat detached. And I would tell you that I think, again, it started in 2002, and I think it started then and there. Yeah, go ahead.
Chris, let me go back to that seminal moment where you had to notify Brad Krause's parents or a mother.
Yes.
Do you wish that you had chosen one of the other two, whether it was Commons or Anderson, to tell their families because you didn't know him as well? Do you think things would have changed?
Yeah, maybe, but a lot of it had to do with just Miss Sheila, Brad's mother, and certainly the stepfather, but it was the whole environment. It was it's on TV, it's Brad's picture above the TV. It was the whole environment, and then probably me thinking they've been watching this all day. And then, shortly after I notify Sheila, Brad has a brother, and Brad's brother came over there, and I was utterly convinced, Mark, he was going to punch me. I only could provide so much information. Your brother was killed as a result of direct action. More information will follow. And he was so obviously upset, and rightfully so, at the loss of his brother. I thought he was going to become physical with me. But that was okay. In my mind, I was like, hey, man, I've been punched in the face before. We're going to take one for the home team here. I do want to tell you one other story. So I notified, Brad's body comes home. It was the most patriotic thing at the time. We need to remember it's still '02. So, that sense of patriotism and the proactive stance is still somewhat there. So we do the funeral. We do a memorial ceremony downtown Savannah because the organization has collapsed. But then we have the Ranger Ball. And at the Ranger Ball, me and my wife are there, and I see Sheila. And it shocks me because it's a few months, it's a few months afterwards. And Sheila's husband sees me, and he comes and he grabs me and he says, "Come say hi to Sheila. She'll want to see you." And I'm like, absolutely not. She's got to have nightmares about my face. And this is one night that I don't want to ruin by her seeing me, and then recalling that night that, her door was knocked upon and she was notified.
Did you vocalize that to him, or were you just internalizing those thoughts?
No, I vocalized.
Oh, okay, all right.
I told him that, and he said, no, absolutely not. She's not. She will be so upset if you don't come over, and reluctantly, I went over there, and just it's the way Sheila is. And by the way, she came to my retirement. So, but Sheila came over, and the first thing she would often ask was about my own kids. I had a newborn for whatever reason. My oldest was 16 at the time. My youngest was 14. But then me and my wife conceived and had another child, and she would often ask about my kids. How are your kids? And I was like, boy, is that not the most unselfish thing ever, to lose your child, and then still think of others and their families. So yeah, Mark, it was just, so her, and she's kept it. And Eric Stebner, and I think you've talked to Eric. Me and Eric are fairly close. He came to the sniper section once he redeployed with Alpha Company. And again, I was his first sergeant then after he made the move. And me and Eric have been close. And because he named his child Brad after him, Brad was his best friend, and he's redone the Corvette and the whole 9 yards. Me and Eric, because of somewhat disconnection, have just remained close, because it's something that obviously Eric's very passionate about. By the way, congratulations to Eric Stebner, by the way, to all your listeners who, is one of our newest Ranger Hall of Fame inductees.
Oh, wow.
He will be at the ceremony in July. So congratulations to Eric. It's very, very well deserved. I was glad to see that.
That's amazing. Okay, so let's kind of go back to where you are now from the standpoint of, when you think back to all the times that you sat there and you told other guys to suck it up and you told them, hey, listen, you got to be strong. Obviously, I don't want to say that was wrong advice, because I think you were still speaking from your heart at that point in time. I don't want to speak for you, but
absolutely,
you felt like you were doing the right thing. But in the same respect, when you look back on it now, do you get a sense of how detrimental that was?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The only thing I could say in defense of myself, Mark, is, all these kids are my Facebook buddies, and they will tell you, boy, he was, I never said it in an evil way. Chris, I don't mean to get on you and say like you were doing. No, by no means did I think you had ill intentions. I think from the position you're in now, you realize that kind of the exact opposite direction should have been given. Absolutely. And what I will tell you, Mark, though, is unless you go through it and then you somewhat understand it, honestly, you don't understand it. So I was a proponent as a very senior leader. I sat on the Sergeant Major of the Army's Board of Directors and then the Senior Enlisted Councils, both the FORSCOM and the CENTCOM guy, right? And I used to talk about behavioral health, and we got to get to the left of the boom. And the boom is that event, whether it's, a suicide, whether it's alcohol and or some type of substance abuse, because I think it's all due to being emotionally numb. Well, let me tell you something. Unless you've lived it, it's like going through a divorce. It's really easy to sit there and go, hey, man, there's more fish in the sea. Suck it up. Don't worry that your wife's cheating on you or whatever. Let me tell you something, man. If you ain't lived it, you ain't got a clue. So when it comes to behavioral health, I tried, man. I beat the drumbeat. So I've gone out and I've done, presentations or delivered out at JBLM out at Fort Lewis to a group of soldiers. I went to some people part of the special operations community and shared my experiences from notifying Miss Sheila and kind of taking it through the death of my father and kind of no reaction. And that's probably when I first started realizing, man, I know I love the guy. I sat at his funeral and I'm thinking, man, why is everybody crying around me? Man, am I supposed to cry? And by the way, if I am, how do I say, how do I get some tears to flow? Because I'm really not feeling it. So what I will say is, unless you've lived it and you understand it and you understand the effects of, and again, I call it being emotionally numb. Some people call it being depressed. Although depression is still an ugly word in the military. Nobody's going to use that.
Right.
I think PTSD has become less of a dirty word, although people still don't know how to utilize it. But most senior leaders, I think, probably were like myself when I was the FORSCOM CSM or whatever, or even 10th Mountain Division CSM. Is that dude or dudette really suffering? What is this? Because again, unless you live it, you hear everybody talking about it. But It was like I was involved in an event. So on 18 May 2000, I was on a PDSS, and we got hit by an SVBIED in Kabul, Afghanistan. And our lead, I was in the second up-armored Tahoe. Our lead vehicle, it killed all 6 occupants. So it killed our Division G1, Colonel Belcofer, killed our G8, Colonel Bartz, killed Colonel McHugh. He was just strapped along from Fort Leavenworth. Colonel Jeff Parker, Canadian XO to General Corbold. And literally, this was our first day in theater. And I'm telling the TC, though I'm TCing, I'm telling the driver, the non-commissioned officer in charge of this little convoy, I said, "You're going to move us like this?" And he goes, "Excuse me, Sergeant Major?" I said, "The signature this is presenting, man, in 5 black up-armored or 6 black up-armored vehicles." I said, "You got to be crazy, man." He goes, "Sergeant Major, we move everybody like this." And we were talking about how dumb this was in the vehicle. And 40 minutes later, man, out of the corner of my right eye, Mark, that flash goes, and I'm literally starting to do ankle rotations to see if I still have my legs, because it destroyed, absolutely crushed the vehicle I was in, besides killing the 6, people in the lead vehicle. My message to them was, hey, they'll kill you on day 1 or they'll kill you on day 365. Well, when we finally collapsed, my CG, General James Terry, brings the collective group together, the survivors, and says, hey, man, this is day 1. We're still here, for a reason, this whatever. And he says, like most commissioned officers, hey, Sergeant Major, you got anything for the group? And I said, yeah, who's going to pick up Colonel Belcofer's and Colonel Bartz's duties? Because General Terry, didn't say that. I brought it up, and I'm thinking, am I kind of being pardon my language, a dick here for bringing this up? But the way I saw it is, right, we had a mission, and collectively we were over there for a reason. And, although we got hit, we needed to regroup, and then kind of pick up the mission. And, tragically, because again, it was our PDSS, we go home 2 weeks later to Fort Drum, and we do a ceremony, for Colonel Buckford and Colonel Bartz, and they had, little children, and to watch those children, that always pulled on tugged on a heartstring, man, where that would be tougher than most losses when I knew they had kids.
You talk about having to live through it. Can you explain how you can help someone when you haven't completely healed yourself?
Well, I think the first thing is, Mark, is you need to recognize maybe potentially that you have an issue. And I'll tell you, at least for me, it was my spouse, right? So it's having that Ranger buddy around. It's having others external, because we don't see ourselves the way that we are. I looked in the mirror this morning and said, hey, I'm a good looking dude, and I look 35, right? And then a nurse walked in and said, you look 75, and you're not ever in a good mood. The point being is we don't see ourselves accurately. So we need the help of family and friends and others to recognize that potentially, there is an issue. And then what I will tell people is reach out. The stigma, I think it's crazy to say, a stigma exists. I do, as an example, I do sessions remotely, via, it's through the VA, but on my computer, like a Skype or a FaceTime session, with a provider. And the progress that we've made has just been tremendous. But it's, number one, it's gaining an understanding that you have an issue. And then it's trying to develop strategies and courses of action to kind of get, through it. For me, it was physically, mentally, and emotionally. It was all of the above, and they were all interrelated. And as I started to kind of break down physically a little bit, started to snowball. And that's really what happened to me is they put me on Ambien when I was deployed in 2007. Well, if one Ambien didn't work, I'd take 2. If 2 didn't work, I'd take 3. Well, I had some physicians say, well, you're lucky you woke up. And I was like, well, I just want to sleep. I'm not suicidal. I'm just telling you, Chris Greca just craves sleep that much. And we both know if you're not sleeping, well, you're miserable, man. So, as the CENTCOM Sergeant Major, we had 20 countries, 75,000 uniformed servicemen and women in the CENTCOM AOR. I took over right at the time that the Islamic State went through Syria and started rushing down. In the 26 months that I was there, monthly, I was going into the region. So I would fly 14 hours one way, spend a week, 2 weeks, circulate in and around, whether it was Afghanistan, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, different areas, different countries. And then I would fly back. Well, my circadian rhythm, was just off. In between almost every visit, I had a surgery. So I had a neck fusion that was done in between, one of my months. So I came back, they fused my neck. I waited a couple weeks, and no kidding, 2 weeks later, I'm flying overseas. I had neck surgery. I had 2 eye alignment surgeries because my eye, it's got misaligned, and I've had like 4 surgeries to try to realign my eye. So I was getting my eye operated on. I had a knee surgery. So I was physically breaking down. I wasn't sleeping. And then I thought I had a heart attack. And I was like, oh man, I'm having a heart attack. I'm going to die at my house. And it made somebody, I had a great person who works with the Care Coalition, over in Landstuhl, Germany. She was coincidentally in Tampa in the region. She shows up at this hospital I'm in and says, kicks everybody out, shuts the door with me and my wife and says, you had a panic attack. And I'm like, no, I didn't. You've got to be panicked or stressed or whatever it is. You got to be one of those dudes or dudettes who's, I'm not one of those guys. And she made me understand it. And my hypervigilance and inside my mind and the way I think, and I, still think when I go out in public, and, how that can cause issues. But if you don't understand it, you'll put all these weird thoughts. I've often thought I'm going to die, not in combat, just in some freaky ass way, right? I'm going to have a heart attack. Well, if you start thinking that stuff, you'll, have those fight or flight symptoms. But I didn't understand this, Mark, until I was coming out of the CENTCOM seat. So you're talking 30 plus years in uniform. I thought most people who said they had PTSD were, not all of them. I certainly know not everybody's faking it, but a lot of them just want money. But it took me to have my own event to better understand it. And then I tried to put it out there and still try to put it out there to this day. If you ever want a senior dude to come around, and kind of explain, I'm like one of the only NCOs that have worked at the 1, 2, 3, 4-star level ×2, both at an ACOM and a COCOM for commanders, and, I know a lot of people, and I tried to use those contacts to potentially say, hey, give me an opportunity. It's not for Chris Greca. It's for the population out there, the men and women in uniform or those that wore the uniform, that maybe I can explain it to a point that they better understand what's going on with them.
And you took to Facebook, your own personal Facebook, to tell part of this story, correct?
Oh, I did. Yeah, absolutely. I actually went up to, it's the National Intrepid Center of Excellence. Really, SOCOM controls it, but because of my background, they did a couple weeks of inpatient. This was when I was still in uniform, because my wife said, you ain't waiting. What I kept trying to do, Mark, was get to retirement, and then I would worry about, I used to say it all the time, I just got to get to the end of the road. Once I get to the end of the road, we'll get all this stuff fixed. Well, my wife said, no, you're not. You're going to go now. So I went up to Bethesda Walter Reed for a couple of weeks. And when I came back, I thought I would be a hypocrite if I didn't somewhat explain my situation. Because we would say all the time, there's no stigma, right? And if you got this issue, whatever. But very few leaders, no senior leaders were coming out saying that they did it. So I just said, hey, man, let me go on Facebook. And it got shared it was crazy, like 500 times. And the Army Times gets a hold of me and, wants to discuss it. And really what, my message was, I just want this to be about awareness, because if it can happen to me, I guess my point is, I'm not down in the trenches every day. I've lived a pretty cush life as a sergeant major guy, right? So I fly around on helicopters and I get off and, I go out and I circulate, but, I'm not every night, for 364 days, minus R&R living out there in the suck with these young men and women, like they are. So, man, I've kind of lived the easy life. So if I don't tell my story from the easy life kind of side, I'm being a hypocrite, because I know men and women have been exposed to a hell of a lot more than I have and ever will be. So, and if I need help, maybe they do as well.
So you continue your kind of own personal mission with helping vets with mental health and active soldiers with mental health, but you also own the Fifth Principle LLC. Tell me about that company and what it does.
Yeah, I do. And Fifth Principle is it's the fifth principle of patrolling, by the way, which is taught in the United States Army Ranger School, which is common sense, right? And what I wanted to do is, and I always had this when I worked out at the Combined Arms Center, developing people. So what have I done professionally, or what did I do professionally for 31 plus years, is I built individuals and cohesive teams. And I really want to do that in the civilian sector. I constantly hear about, how dysfunctional people who get out of the military, we had that conversation about taking off the uniform and what's next. Well, for a lot of folks, the what next isn't a good experience, right? They get out and they're used to this camaraderie and this esprit de corps that, existed between their brothers and sisters in arms, those people on the left flank and right flank, and they don't experience that in the civilian world. So what I'm attempting to do with Fifth Principle is bring some of that to the civilian sector. Now, with that being said, Fifth Principle is also public speaking, and an opportunity for me to talk about some of these issues. If people want me to come in, I gladly come in and I speak to anything from building teams, building individuals, ethical decision making, some of the mistakes that, we've made, especially with social media and how it can jump in the public eye in a heartbeat, but talk about this stuff. But then I will gladly share my own personal experiences, not only what I went through, but what I am currently going through still, because it's, again, man, I just can't flip that switch on and all of a sudden be this, emotionally loving person. So, I'm trying, and me and my wife, by the way, we've been married for 30 years, and, so she's been at my side and been on this whole journey with me. Even right now, she's sitting outside this room in the hospital room, making sure nobody comes in while we're doing this conversation. So
God bless her, right?
Yeah, well, she's been my better half. When you take off the uniform, hopefully, these guys and gals have those people in their life, because I'll tell you, being a 51, almost a 52-year-old man, that's truly what's important, are the people that you surround yourself with, and not the job titles and all the, all the other stuff that comes along with that. It's really about the people.
Well, so it's been nearly an incomparable career for you, but obviously for everything you've accomplished, it almost seems like your post-career work is having a much more profound effect and a longer lasting effect than anything you may have done during your career. And certainly, what you're doing now speaks to our audience, and the message of mental health and mental health awareness and everything else for vets is huge, and just can't thank you enough for continuing that mission.
Well, Mark, seriously, man, I thank you very, very much for inviting me on here. Maybe there's a listener or two that this helps. And by the way, anybody can reach me at ckgreca, Greca, at outlook.com. So if anybody's got a question, in reference to something that maybe I missed, what I went through, they can email me at any time, and I promise I'll answer them. So thanks for inviting me on here, Mark. And I know we've been all over the place, but it's like you said at the beginning, it's hard to cover 30 plus years, in an hour.
No, it certainly is, but I think we hit all the right points and all the high notes right when we needed to. So again, certainly thank you for your time. But Chris Greca, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Well, thanks.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.